What's the worst coworker you've ever worked with? Hired a cook on a good recommendation. He was just fine the first 2 weeks. Then I noticed food going missing. Then supplies started going missing. Then a customer told me that he had been adding auto 30% tips as food purchases. When I looked at the books, I saw that he had been adding 30% tips to all the credit card sales. And the cash rings were off from what should have been sold. I fired him that day. The next day he came in and apologized. Said he was on drugs and was going to rehab. I wished him well. Then next day he tried to break in after close and was caught. Idiot. Me reading your comment. I hired a cook. Oh, this is going to be about drugs. He just wouldn't work. Just wouldn't. This was in a research lab. He was a visiting researcher from another country, and he spent a lot of time asking tons of non-work related questions, to the point of disrupting others' work. In the course of a year, he designed one very basic experiment, and didn't actually do it. Just designed it. He was above doing bench work apparently. He picked fights with everyone doing any experiment related to the one he was planning, because he didn't want to have to share credit for anyone. He wouldn't clean up after himself, wouldn't pick up things from the floor. He actually called me in from another room, because he wouldn't take a stringless tea bag out of his mug. Also on a different occasion, because he'd knocked some things off a hanger on the back of the door, and for whatever reason wouldn't pick them up. It was kind of like working with a child. He must have had servants where he lived. I don't know how, but he was there for his PhD. Boss fired him. He was one of 2 people in her 30+ year career that she'd ever fired. Edit. 90 messages. Whoa. In the interest of not inspiring/reinforcing any stereotypes, I won't name the country. Such a person could come from many, and I dare say, any country honestly. He wouldn't do bench work. During his PhD, I worked with a guy who'd interrupt any conversation to talk about anything, as if he was the expert. And I don't use anything as a hyperbole. He truly had something to say about anything, including things he had never heard of or obviously didn't know much about. When the subject being discussed was something in the category of things he didn't know much about, he would slowly steer the conversation away from the original discussion to something he would like to talk about at the moment. It was both amazing and the most annoying thing I had ever had to deal with. He was like that Wikipedia game where you start with Star Wars and somehow end up on LGBTQ+ struggles. Not to mention the conversation was basically 98% of him just talking non-stop. Everybody else was way too polite and against conflict to say anything, including me, so most people just tried to stay away from him, but he'd follow people around. I eventually left, but I even remember having a nightmare where he was the best man at my wedding. I worked with a guy like that. My favorite was he would jump in. Speaking of X, that reminds me of, and it got to the point the rest of the team just stopped talking. I thought I was desultory until I met this guy. This guy named Daniel I used to work with at McDonald's in high school. He let everyone know he worked out and enjoyed being on the football team. He had this thing about taking 5 chizzes a day. He would walk by on his way back from the toilet, chest out, shoulders back and triumphantly announce that's chiz number 3. Ducking Daniel. Let a man announce his chizzes. I had a manager once who dumped trash on my desk my 3rd day there. She said it was to remind me that taking out the trash was part of my job description. It wasn't. I was a research assistant at a mortgage firm. Whoa. Had this same situation. We had a full maintenance crew, but my department had previously helped with parking lot trash until our hours were cut, which was discussed and mandated from corporate. The top guy for our location came in extra early, picked up the parking lot trash, and dumped it on my desk. Then he berated all of the managers in front of everyone for my department. Just the tip of the iceberg when it came that a-hole, though. This is about 15 years ago, but the office I worked in instituted a scent-free policy. One woman, who was already insufferable, was so offended by it that she snuck in her perfume collection. She'd walk down the halls and spray perfume into empty offices or cubicles when no one was looking, or before everyone arrived in the morning. This went on for well over a month or 2, and we had no idea who was responsible. My coworkers and I started referring to this mysterious person as the Channel Bandit. She was finally caught on camera in the act. She'd left for 3 weeks vacation and was unaware that we had installed cameras after a break-in. Some of us already suspected her as the channel bandit mysteriously stopped spraying while she was away. She quit right after she was caught. None of us were sad to see that cedar-scented psycho leave. I didn't realize a scent-free policy was a thing. Was that due to the type of work you were doing, or allergies or something else entirely? My worst coworker was one I worked with when I was a cashier at Walmart. She approached me and asked me to cash out her paycheck. I was still new at the job and never got training on how to do that function. She was sympathetic, so she walked me through how to do it. Transaction over and done. I go on about my day. I get called back a couple of days later by my managers and they circled me in an office and accused me of stealing. After tears, videotapes, and telling them what happened, they told me that apparently this coworker of mine had stolen not only from me, but several other people that day as well. They just wanted to confirm I wasn't in on the deal. Duck Walmart and duck that bitch for almost getting me arrested. I was a Walmart cashier and some young adults. I checked them out. They came back and said I shorted them $20. I said I don't think I did. My drawers were always balanced to the penny. They insisted I shortchanged them $20, giving them the benefit of the doubt because, I've been shortchanged before and maybe I really did. I'm not impervious to mistakes. So I called my CSM over, described the situation, and said I'd like to drop my drawer and have her count it. Now the young adults are all, it's no big deal. We don't want to be any trouble or waste any time. And of course you know the ending. Those two guys were working a con on me or trying to. CSM counted my drawer and it balanced to the penny. The conman left and my CSM said I did the right thing. I was right. I didn't shortchange those bastards. Your story about the girl conning you with cashing the check reminded me of those dudes trying to con me. Sorry she got the best of you. My coworker likes to initiate conversations, then does long pauses where you go to say something back, then he cuts you off and keeps talking. He has entire conversations almost entirely by himself. He also likes to make changes to my paperwork before it's turned in. Ends up riddled with spelling mistakes while he tries to make the content look smarter. Fortunately it's all electronically stamped with who made revisions. My boyfriend does that weird conversation thing. Sometimes I just try to talk over him. Sometimes I leave the room. He still doesn't know what I'm talking about when I bring it up. My current suspicion is he's formulating the next sentence during that pause. Either way it drives his mum and I insane. He would walk in every day like it was his first day with no memory of anything we showed him the previous day. He was only focused for the first 30 minutes, then the rest of the time would be on his phone and try to work with one hand, which is bad because I work in a restaurant. Can't cook with one hand, but that didn't stop him from trying. Then one day he just stopped showing up for like a week, then was confused when he came back and was fired. Edit. I'm not sure if he had memory issues or anything like that. At least he didn't tell us or the owner. He did however like to talk about how easy our job was because he'd had 4 other restaurant jobs before this one. He was only 19, but we didn't make him do anything complicated. But he would forget easy things like where we kept burger buns or where buttons were on the register. Also he always left trash laying around. After he was done with a job it would be me and my other coworkers who cleaned up after him, and his excuse was always that he didn't think it mattered because it was gonna get cleaned up eventually. He still comes in every once in a while to watch our TV, sometimes with friends and sometimes by himself. He never buys anything but he just does it quietly so no one bothers him. I had a packager operator I worked with on the machine I run. He did okay, but every Monday I would have to basically retrain him on the packager controls. I guess he had an excuse or because he had a beef from a motorcycle wreck years before. Once I jogged his memory he did good for the rest of the week. He creeped the duck out of all the girls at work, and then it came out he had stalking and sexual assault charges pending outside work. Fired that day. I had a guy at work make a bunch of gross comments in a full break room. My husband was sitting in the break room waiting for me. Heard all of it. I walked right into ours and listed the 30-some people in this normally really quiet lunchroom. That dude was so gross. No contest. It was the literal crackhead I worked with for 4 months that was also secretly living in the office and being completely nonsensical when he was actually working. We found a mattress folded up in the warehouse after he was let go and an actual brand new crack pipe with a price tag on it to boot squirreled away back there. He and his family, not just him living in the office, left discarded food everywhere like pizza crusts in the toilet brush holder in the bathroom. What even? And they left hair in the sink in the bathroom as they were obviously bathing in there too, as we had no actual bathing facilities in the office. One day during his tenure, he sent an email saying his alarm didn't go off and he'd be in at X time, which kept getting moved back later and later. He eventually showed up at 4:40 PM and we closed at 5 PM. Lol. See comment above about secretly living in the office. There's so much more I could go into. It was a wild 4 months, that's for sure. Edit. This blew up in a way I did not anticipate, and I've gotten a few responses that I'm making this up, but let me tell you, I really wish that I were. His girlfriend was always around at work and she would move in a way that you would absolutely never see her face. We thought maybe she had a warrant out for her arrest or something. I think only one of us saw her actual face and she would also sit behind the warehouse bay door and then as an Ultima, with it running all day for the account when she wasn't back there with him. He wanted us to hire her to help him, which wasn't happening. Our warehouse area was concrete flooring which didn't get cleaned often at all, and she'd walk around back there barefoot. As mentioned before, he was completely nonsensical at work as well. He suggested to my coworker, who scans our old documents to PDF via a feeder on our copier, of course, that she should take a picture of each page with her cell phone and do it that way. I got multiple emails from him that made no sense at all, and I eventually had to just forward some to my boss so he could see what was going on. It was a sad situation, but also a WTF situation for the rest of us. He brought his GF to the interview and asked if she could sit in on it because it was so hot outside. Now, if we didn't have a Walmart and a huge shopping center within spitting distance, that might have made sense, but that was pretty unprofessional, and they still hired him. All we did was lose money by employing him. He worked on one pro bono job we did and managed to duck that up. This was at an engineering firm, by the way. OMG, you worked with Creed. When I was an intern, there was this old shrew who would call people into her office. My cube shared a thin wall, gossip, then call those people in to tell them what was said, etc. She would try to frame people for shit she did wrong. She was so arrogant, and she refused to adapt to workforce modernization. Example, she refused to learn how to hyperlink in emails, documents, etc. A real ray of sunshine she was. I worked somewhere in the last 3 years where they hired a secretary who refused to use a computer. I couldn't ducking believe it in this day and age. I worked at a grocery store, and one of the scheduling ladies was a total C-bomb. When you work at a grocery store you expect to have shifts all over the place. That's part of the job, so I'm not complaining about that. Just about 2 years into working there I had an accident and broke my thumb/hand. Not while at work unfortunately lol, and needed surgery. I went to apply for employment insurance, EI, and they required a record of employment, RO. So I asked the woman in charge of that, the aforementioned scheduling lady, if she would mind sending that off so I could still pay rent while I was off work recovering. BTW, she told me she already had. So I go back to the EI offices and they told me they still had no row. So I go back to my old work and ask her a second time. This happens until I asked her to do it 4 times. This resulted in me having to borrow money from my parents for Christmas in order to pay my rent. FYI, they broke the law. They have 10 days to provide it and 0 excuses. That's something you don't ask for twice. There's a decent fine for ducking around with an row. Back when I worked at a restaurant I was friends with the bartender, chill dude, right up until they made him manager, and that small amount of power and increase in pressure made him so angry all the time. He screamed at me that I was chiz at my job because I didn't do a thing that I've never been asked to do before. He made me miss my last bus, so I couldn't get home. It was pitch black outside, and I cried on the bench outside the restaurant. Worst working day and worst co-worker. It took me a long time to get over that and realize I wasn't a chiz worker. He was just stressed and didn't know how to handle it, I suppose. It took me a long time to get over that and realize I wasn't a chiz worker. This is hard, especially if someone important to you tells you that. I've developed a proper complex from my Master of Science supervisor telling me that. Now, when my current supervisor tells me I've been doing a stellar job, I think he's lying. I've worked a lot of factories, but one I worked at was mainly for felons. The pay you complete chiz and work you so hard it tears you body and mind up. I just graduated high school, and it was my second factory, so I didn't know any better. One guy I work with, we nicknamed Big Matt, since we already had another Matt. Well, Big Matt was a big fan of crystal and steroids, so the dude was absolutely jacked, but this 35-year-old lived with his mom. He said it had to do with him being a kid and walking and her being raped, and ever since then he never wanted to leave her alone. At the time I thought, wow, that would explain the substance abuse. He just wants to be strong to protect her. Well, I was a ducking idiot. 2 months later, Big Matt and 2 coworkers didn't show up, so I asked the supervisor what happened, but he didn't know either. Next day one of the coworkers came in and told us that all 3 had been arrested because after buying an O of weed, Big Matt's mom called the cops on them. So before the cops showed up, Big Matt, a 6'some-odd-inch buff meth head, beat his mother within an inch of life for calling the cops on him. Next day I looked him up, and sure enough he was booked in a local prison. Suppose that has to be the worst coworker out of all the ones I faced. What was the other Matt like? He was a complete utter moron. He was incompetent in every way, but the icing on the cake was when he tried to put one of the pickup trucks into gear with the wiper stick and called me an idiot when I told him it was the wrong lever. Edit 1. Oh my god. I didn't expect this to garner so much attention. Edit 2. I see a lot of comments thinking it was a 3 on the tree manual. This truck was a 98 Ram 1500 automatic trans column shifter. Did you say wrong lever crank? Worked with a girl who would sometimes just lay on the floor and play on her phone. She would routinely flip out about something her boyfriend did and just start screaming curse words, sometimes in front of customers. She was eventually fired for smoking weed while on the clock. Every time I think I'm a duck up, I read stories like this and I feel better about myself instantly. My old supervisor. She was that special brand of too nice. Laughing was her nervous tick, and whoo boy, it was constant. She was incapable of being assertive, which is not the best quality for someone whose job is telling other people what to do. The best she could do was be passive-aggressively nice when she really needed something done, which just made everyone dislike her. My current supervisor is clearly new to it. He's not nearly assertive enough. I've been struggling with my coworker not doing tasks I aim to him, which I have the authority to aim to him, but no ability to enforce, and when I bring it up with my supervisor he will do that coworker's job instead of kicking his A. Context: I work in a hospital as a nurse's aide and my department focuses on transporting patients around the facility for tests and room changes. I work night shift and this person started their shift at 6 AM. There was this lady I worked with that just had the nastiest attitude. Normally I can get along with most folks, but this person just brought the whole room down with negative vibes. Nothing was ever good, and she always had bad shifts. One thing she did that upset a lot of people was take patients down for rays and leave them down there to return to our office. The big thing to remember here is that even the lengthiest rays take maybe 10 minutes at the very most, 2 to 5 minutes on average for the scans. Every morning we got rays to do, and I had to send her back down to return patients to their rooms after the ray technicians called right as she got back to our office. The instances of leaving patients were common, so I informed my boss several times in person and email. Apparently she had an attitude with every other department we worked with and never informed nurses that we were moving their patients. Big no when meds and vital signs need to be done. One day she had abandoned a patient in the waiting room when they were waiting for a ride home and told no one. So security had found a patient just sitting alone for 15 to 30 minutes without supervision. It took this and a year of recorded evidence for this person to finally get fired. When that happened, it's like a dark cloud lifted and a lot of people were relieved. Oh, and she tried to get various employees around the facility to sign a form to argue against her case. One person signed. Lol at the form signing. OMG. My deepest terror is that I'm that person at work and that no one would sign that form, but hopefully neither of us are those people. 3. One of my favorite things about being in the military was that your pre-military status did not matter. Everyone wears the same uniform and you'd never know if your favorite military leader came from privilege or squalor. The uniform, for all of its drawbacks, is an objectively effective unifier. It levels the playing field. Looking the same as everyone else challenged me to ensure that my work ethic and ideas created opportunities, not some predetermined status. I had a peer who was better than all of that. He didn't do the work unless it interested him. We didn't do interesting things and constantly complained that our work was below him. On more than one occasion, he tried to pay for others to do his work for him. His entire point of being in the military was to prove to his father that he could earn something, and sought to accomplish that by claiming he'd already earned it. Duck that guy. One of my favorite things about being in the military was that your pre-military status did not matter. I don't know about that. We had a guy whose father was a millionaire. Not like he had a million, but like he gave his son $500,000 as a present for joining the military. That dude did not give one flying duck about anything military related and always avoided trouble for it. After he got his Purple Heart on patrol, pretty much everyone, officer and NCO, just left him alone. He was in for another 2 years and barely showed up for work stateside. He really rubbed it in everyone's face too. I liked him. Most guys couldn't stand him. We had another guy who was a really average private, but he paid for everything for everyone without being obnoxious about it. He never talked about where his money came from, but it was obvious his family was wealthy. Nobody gave him chiz because he was nice, good looking, and you never wanted to chiz on the guy whose dad sent $100 care packages to everyone in the platoon. His name was Dan. Dan was 37, working at a dead-end job as a lab specimen processor in a windowless room for 9 hours a day. He ate only Burger King, but without the lettuce, because that's rabbit food. He drank literally a gallon of Mountain Dew a day and was confused as to why people were horrified by that. There's water in it, he would say. Apparently if he ate corn he would vomit and have to go to the hospital. He would tell me he firmly believed that man and dinosaur roamed the earth at the same time, along with many other theories that came from his gut. One day we got into a political argument before the 2016 election where he said, if Bernie Sanders is elected president, there will be a civil war, and I will not hesitate to kill you and your family. Dan was fired. I got out of there as soon as I could. Don't be like Dan. With that diet, I wouldn't trust anything that comes from his gut. I worked in a certain touring exhibition last summer. It's not Potter, FYI, and of 200 people who were applying for jobs, 20 of us got the job. We were all close-knit and had a love for the exhibit content, and being all genuinely interesting people made us a family. Bar one woman. She thought she was the world's biggest star for having a 3-second cameo on GOT, and sent harrowing messages and calls to many of us. She sexually harried a lovely guy on the shop team who had no interest, undermined the bosses constantly, talked back, was rude to customers. When she thought we talked about her behind her back, she got defensive and spiteful. We didn't. One day she got knocked back for good by the shop guy, and for some reason decided to take it out on me. Started slabbering about me around to every other coworker, but never to my face. She called me a white snake. Now, I'm albino and my hair color got me seriously bullied in school along the vein of her insults, so her name calling was very hurtful. I had enough and took it 2 hours, and she was fired for her actions. I could go on, but she doesn't deserve any more thought. Goatee cameo and user of the word slabbering. Definitely Northern Ireland. Deleted. All my coworkers are so cool with me wearing flip-flops at the construction site and letting me work half as much because I don't have the correct shoes. Not necessarily a coworker, but my old supervisor literally told me not to think, even if it's wrong, that I do things her way and not to ask questions because I should already know what to do. I had just gotten the position. My wife talked about a supervisor her first husband had. When the husband, had an idea about improving their methods, the supervisor, who had a really strong Chicago accent, think of Saturday Night Live, Da Bears would say you don't think, I think, and you do. At my first job, vet assistant at a small animal clinic, there was this middle-aged woman. She primarily worked as the receptionist, who was constantly snarky and rude towards me and my work. After sharing with another coworker that I was planning to go to school to become a vet, she, the receptionist, laughed at me and said I don't think I could see you as a vet. I was only 16 years old, mind you. I had big dreams and goals, and I was taking solid steps towards achieving them. I remember standing there, taken aback, and honestly holding back tears or any indication that I was upset. I was accepted to vet school at age 18, and I'm still in school actively pursuing that dream. Guess I'm gonna prove her wrong. Edit. To clarify, I was accepted into an early entry program for vet school. That is how I was accepted at 18. I'm in pre-vet undergrad currently, but I have been pre-accepted to vet school with a guaranteed seat waiting for me in my school's CVM after I finish my prereqs. No more application required. Edit 2. Your kind comments really mean a lot to me. Thank you all. I'm working hard and following my goals and dreams. Not for her, for me, and, most importantly, for all of the animals I will hopefully have the opportunity to help one day. Sounds like she's bitter. I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out she'd wanted to be a vet, but failed the entry exams or something. Fast food. Third shift. The only other employee stayed in the bathroom doing blow. How TF do you afford coke on a fast food paycheck? I work with this guy that tries to convert people to his religion every day. It's super annoying. I worked with a really nice guy at my old job. Added him on FB. Multiple Bible study videos every day. He didn't say anything about religion at work. That's how you do it. I worked in childcare, and they had hired a new assistant/trainee teacher for my room. Each room has 2 teachers. She just constantly argued about the dumbest shiz, and always tried to argue with me about both company and state childcare policies because that's dumb. Also was late every day her first week there. It all just started adding up until I was changing diapers and she was holding a 2-year-old child on her lap. I see a child biting another child and say you need to go help them as I have a child in the middle of a very explosive poopy diaper change up on the changing table and can't leave him there obviously. She doesn't get up. I repeat it and she says well I have this kid on my lap, so I say take him off your lap. She responds headstrong like this grown adult is unable to move a 2-year-old off her lap because of some weird super strength. Then the child bites the other child again, and at that point I'm mad and tell her to get up and help them now. She then proceeds to say so what? I have to watch these 4 kids while you just have one up on the table, like I'm somehow supposed to have multiple children on the table at once. To make her job of sitting on the floor making sure kids don't get bit twice in a row easier, and our ratios were 4:1 anyways. I finished my diaper change, stuck my head out the door to my supervisor, and told her get this lady out of my room and they did after, and wrote her up after reviewing the footage of the incident. She was fired for no call no showing the next week. I've worked with a lot of idiots in childcare, but she was so chisty in such a short amount of time. Oh man. I had a short stint in childcare and had to quit because of the lack of help. I wish I would have had a room of 4 toddlers with another teacher. We would have done so well. Instead I was stuck in a class by myself with 7 toddlers, one of which was a serial biter and there was nothing I could do come diaper changing time except watch in horror and try to hurry up. I felt like she's having to constantly talk to the victim's parents about each incident, and I begged my director for help, but she wouldn't hire another teacher. Who knows why? I just texted her one day after work saying I was done and wouldn't be back. It was terrible. It's my time to shine. Sorry it's long. About 2 years ago I started work as a receptionist in an audiology clinic. So we do hearing aids and hearing tests. The only thing I knew about hearing aids before I took this job was that my grandpa had one 8 months after I started, so at this point I have 8 months of experience with anything related to hearing. They hired a new provider, who I would later discover knew nothing about anything. Not hearing aids. Not basic you should know this if you've had a job ever. Not how to handle talking to bosses, patients, people over the phone, etc. Example, we had one patient who left her hearing aids with us to be fixed. She would call every once in a while to check on them, and I would say I'll ask the provider to call you and update you, which I did. 4 months later the same patient calls and I discover the provider had been ignoring me every time I told her to call the patient, and she just straight up didn't call her ever. Another example, she could never ever remember to clock in and out. Ever. It was a daily struggle with her. She would have to send in time card adjustments like every day and then complain to me when our boss was annoyed. She didn't know to fill out repair forms, so every time we had to send something out, I would have to double check and make sure everything was filled out correctly and legibly again. She is the provider who is credentialed in this field, and I'm the receptionist who has 8 MO's experience with hearing aids. She wouldn't do chart notes for weeks, literally. She would have patient charts stacked in the corner of her office for days, forget to make chart notes, put in the incorrect dates, spell the patient's name wrong, so I would have to double check every chart before putting it back on the shelves. If she didn't know what to do with a patient, which was common, she would just do nothing. So I would have to pick up all of that slack, deal with the patients, take their complaints, talk to manufacturers over the phone. There were even times where I had to recommend hearing aids to patients because she just wouldn't. She would constantly forget to have patients sign paperwork. I would put a post-it on the chart patient must sign. I would tell her beforehand, and yet she would still let them leave without signing purchase agreements and medical waivers. She could not keep track of the time. She would be going 10 to 30 minutes over appointment times and I would have to deal with the pissed off patient. I would tell her hey time warning and she'd say okay and then ignore me. She would keep elderly patients in for her new patient appointments for like 2 or more hours, usually an hour and a half appointment. Sometimes patients would have to tell her they needed to leave because they were tired or their feet hurt. These people are in their 80s. And the best, everything that went wrong was my fault. She would blame me for her poor job performance, her inability to retain patients and sell hearing aids, everything. After 6 months of this, I finally spoke up. I hadn't said anything up to this point because she was a really nice person apart from work, and I felt bad for her. But everyone has their limits, and also our company was starting to zero in on her because she wasn't making them any money. She was put on daily Zoom meetings with our boss and trainers. When this happened they finally realized why she was making almost zero money. She was super incompetent odds, and they fired her. They told her they were shutting down the clinic altogether, but instead they hired a new provider with loads more education, experience, someone who is confident and young, and knows how an iPhone works. The only thing I got from this experience was a 30-cent raise at the end of the year, and a major increases in my anxiety med dosage. Also I guess I learned a lot about my job lol. Also the new provider and I are BFFs, so my job is much more enjoyable. We had one of these, in a different field. Credentialed professional allowed her desk space to look like a hoarder's den. No idea what she had or hadn't done with any specific task, since she didn't leave required notes, or if she did they were entirely unintelligible. Had to bring in outside auditors when she left to try to make heads or tails of her workload. The CEO's girlfriend was a devout vegan who would patrol the office around lunch to make sure that anyone who was eating meat promised not to use the sponge in the kitchen to wash anything that meat had touched. She did this in yoga pants and heels, but because her personality sucked, she wasn't remotely attractive. For April Fool's Day, I rinsed out a carton of chicken broth and filled it with mango juice and made a point of pouring myself a glass and drinking it in front of her. She was disgusted, so it was twice as delicious. Edit. She is both the financial manager and the hour person, so every problem that anyone had at the company became pillow talk between her and her fiance, and he would sprinkle in the things she told him at meetings, as if the problems were supposed to be common knowledge. This pair was a piece of work. He had been overheard saying I wouldn't care if I didn't hear music again in my life. Who says that? Sociopaths, that's who. I was eventually fired, and the official reason was that I had photoshopped grotesque images of several people in the office. What she failed to mention to the Department of Labor rep was that I had done it on my own time, on my own computer, and each coworker had requested I do them next, after I initially just did it to myself. My own photo just had my eyes moved farther apart, so I looked abnormal, but not outside of the realm of possibility. For other coworkers, I flipped their faces upside down, made their eyes too big, removed their noses, facial hair, or covered their mouths up with beards. During my Department of Labor chat, to work out my unemployment, the agent asked me to email her the photos, and it made her audibly laugh. Being fired was worth it just for that. Yoga pants and heels sounds like an odd choice. Edit. Apparently this is a Peg Bundy. Till. 3-person department. Myself, an awesome dude, and this terrible new coworker. She was fresh out of college and believed that she was smarter than myself and our other team member because of that. She totally discounted anyone's opinions except her own, and one manager that let her do whatever she wanted. She was the worst one-upper than I'd ever met. Even for stupid things, like going to a coffee stand, she'd chime in and say how her friends work at a coffee stand and they know her order by heart. Just stupid stuff. She thought she was adorable and charming, but was incredibly grating and worthless. She constantly messed up on her job, but if you tried to help or give any constructive feedback, she'd cry and go to her wet nurse, aka the one manager that liked her. She lasted almost 4 years, which blew my mind. She was furloughed at the beginning of Corona, but will not be returning as her position is being taken by the owner's daughter. The company split about 2 years ago. I went to the new company and she and awesome dude stayed at the old one. 4 years. I mean, it's forgivable when she just graduated and wasn't familiar with workplace. But if she couldn't manage communication and the work, her manager should have such a tolerance. Anyone who has ever talked shiz behind my back while acting like my best friend. I 100% keep my distance from coworkers now. It's so hard to resist the gossip at times, especially in a close-knit work community. But you'll get it back twice as bad as you gave it out. I learned the hard way. Stay out of all coworker bitching. I've had a bunch, but back salad was the worst. It was my job to train her on a position only I knew how to do, and they lied when they said I would definitely be involved in the interview process. I'm still not sure why they did that. No hyperbole, but I ducking crushed that job. Exemplary reviews every year, and positive relationships all around. I didn't need or want the help, but they said they were hiring her for the anticipated future workload. It's been so long I don't even remember why she got that nickname, but it really suited her somehow. She was gluten free, and whenever food came up at all in any conversation she could overhear, she would bring that up. And she spoke in this confused, sing-songy way, like, "Whoop, I'm not sure if I can have that. Do Twizzlers have gluten? I'm gluten free." She didn't understand how to take messages, reply to or forward emails, or print anything. She spoke to herself all day long, in this half-whisper lip-smacking way like, okay, if I just copy, oh no, maybe move it but oh, okay, maybe I'll and would then turn to me with buggy eyes waiting for me to acknowledge her, rather than just asking. Her nose whistled with every breath, but when she breathed through her mouth she would smack her lips or tongue. She loved Big Bang Theory and would regale me with the plot lines of episodes she'd watch, including, and then the Sheldon, goes Bazinga, and oh how I laughed. Goodness, it's so funny. Hee hee. She felt the need to jump in on every conversation she was able to overhear. If I was talking to a friend about a trip or something. Man, Chicago was great. I hope I can go again someday. I never went to Chicago, but my uncle's friend did in the 80s, and he said he had fun. He used to have a garage where he built widgets, and one time his wife crashed their car in the city they lived. Was it town A, town B? I'm not sure, but she was really nice. This one time, I ducking hated her. I know it sounds like a woman out of her depth who was just trying to fit in, and that's true. But some people just grate, and she ducking grated every last nerve and ounce of patience I had. I tried, I just couldn't hack it, and I quit that job 2 months after she started. Energy vampire. I'm pretty cool about people all have their role to play, but one time we had a secretary that would microwave eggs and canned tuna every morning in a bowl. Now, I'm not a violent person, but the smell generated from microwaved eggs and canned tuna is downright repulsive by anyone's standards. Oh man, reminds me of a story where I used to work. A girl there used to microwave tuna 3 times a week, and it was an old building with windows that didn't open because of 50 years of paint accumulated on the hinges. Me and the workshop manager decided to relocate the microwave to a more ventilated area. Out in the warehouse, by the door, we knocked up a bracket in the workshop and screwed it down over the microwave so it couldn't be brought back to the main wing of the building. I worked with a guy who couldn't learn new skills. When he started, he had to learn new programs and processes, just like anyone would at almost any job. He couldn't pick up on it, whether it was where to click in a software to get a certain result or how to fill out a report. Everyone on my team took turns showing him the ropes and it never sunk in. I remember being so frustrated because he could not figure out how to minimize a window. Top right corner, click on the straight line. It took like 3 to 4 seconds for him to drag the mouse to the corner, and then he'd hover around it, but never on it. Super nice guy, but impossible to work and collaborate with on projects because so much time was wasted. I work with a CPA that is still stuck on Lotus 123, the first popular spreadsheet. He just couldn't learn Excel. We keep an old DOS machine around just for him, which is an absolute pain. As the old guy in the office, and especially since all of our red guys are in their 20s, I'm the person that has to support him. Fortunately, the old HP printers are tanks that almost never quit, even though it is getting hard to find a working computer with a 25-pin printer port. He's productive as hell though, and Lotus on his Pentium 4 with text display is super fast. Makes me angry with my new $2,700 desktop running Excel that is sluggish pretty often. I worked with a guy that regularly Googled everyone we worked with. He knew information about the apartment we had just sold and told everyone at our department meeting how much we sold for. That sucks, but it's good to remember how much of our lives are available to the public. Real estate sale prices are almost always public information. In my first week, my boss confided in me that we ought to hang a banner from a tree, and that's when I knew I ducked up. Over the next 3 years I was tormented as she learned more about B. When she learned I loved animals, she would talk about how she shot a skunk and its babies. The liberals are trying to kill Jesus all over again. We just need to kill all the Muslims and be done with it. I don't understand why we don't just nuke Syria. Everyone on the team except for her favorite had gone to her manager about her comments and behavior. We lost 5 employees in 4 months and all of them listed her as the main problem. Finally, after 3 years of her doing her thing, I finally snapped and demanded to speak to her out on the patio of our office and tore into her for at least 10 minutes of viciously explaining to her why she's a terrible human being and just let forth of everything. The next day I was asked to go to ours and they asked me what happened. How much time do you have? However much you feel you need. I was definitely getting fired. Well, it all started when she told me we need to lynch the president. And for 2 hours I went through my entire dossier I had been keeping on her for the last 3 years and ours was rightfully terrified. She was called in later that day, and the next day after that the VP of marketing addressed the team and explained that she wouldn't be returning and she's agreed to take another permission working alone from a different building. She quit shortly after that. I got another 6 months before I saw I was about to get let go for poor numbers and her pet wound up being her replacement. She was much better at the job, but I was horrible in the position and had a terrible view of the company. The pet recommended that I go talk to it about a possible position, and over the Christmas holiday I taught myself enough to get hired on as help desk support. Been there for 2 years and I love my job and company. Despise the marketing department. Close bracket. The pet actually sounds surprisingly competent. The hour manager at my last job had zero training, education or experience in hours. She was argumentative, passive-aggressive and incompetent. Toward the end she asked me, why are you being resistant and you're not being a team player, when I was advocating for client safety. I was the second person in less than a year to leave and hire an attorney. Oh geez. It's the worst when the person we are supposed to turn to for help are not properly trained. At a former job, the general manager was also in charge of ours because it was small office. He was a buddy of the owners and would pit people against each other on a regular basis. There was so much unnecessary drama because of this guy. It's been years, but just the thought of walking into that office and all of its chaos makes me nauseated. In the interview, something along the lines of "You're quite young. How do we know you'll be responsible enough to work with our team?" As if she was running an Olympic team and not a fast food joint. I know this is not an unusual question, but her attitude spoke more than her words. Well, I was technically homeless, a young teenager at the time, staying in a shelter. I explained this being my motivation. I needed a day program, wanted a permanent place to live, and someday be comfortable enough financially to go back to school. Before I was homeless, I had amazing grades in school, volunteered with the Red Cross and a few other organizations, babysat for many families, had my babysitting course and first aid training. So it wasn't as if I had a terrible resume, but she talked down to me as if I should be kissing the ground she walked on, just because she provided me with an interview. Well, a week or two went by, and I didn't hear back from them, so I assumed I didn't get the job. Third week I get the call and was told to come in later that week for training. Once again, such attitude. She didn't ask, she didn't offer, she demanded I be there. Well, I had gotten another job, but was more than willing to work 2 jobs to achieve my goals. My very first day, on my very first shift, I was given the most basic instructions. Read the employee handbook, then come get her. It took me no time. She was adamant I was illiterate because I was so quick, so I must not have read it. She was pointing to random words getting me to read them. It was annoying. But goals. Homeless and all. She walked me over to a till, put me in a headset, and told the other woman at the till to make me do all the work. I tried my best, but zero training on anything, no guidance. On a weekday lunch rush in an industrial area, it went bad, fast. Mid-order she grabbed my arm and dragged me into the office. She berated me for a solid 10 minutes on how I was just some pathetic, disgusting homeless scum with no manners. No wonder no one wanted me. No wonder I was homeless. How pathetic. Honestly, it makes me cry thinking about how cruel and harsh she was. She had no idea I was homeless because my parents were beating me, starving me, neglecting me. No. She just knew I was this young homeless piece of cheese. I took it. Not a ducking tear in front of her. I knew if I cried, well, let's just say, had I had a therapist, then I would have been diagnosed with battered women syndrome much sooner. I knew not to cry. Finally she was done. I took off the headset, went to the staff room to change, grabbed my stuff and left. No one said a word to me. I just left. Once in the parking lot, just far enough away to be in the same lot, but in front of another business. I fell to my knees and began crying. Rage crying, sobbing, crocodile tears, full on breakdown. You know the kind. It feels like you won't ever stop crying. Someone came up to me and put her arm around me. I just cried in her arms. When I was done, I finally saw who it was. It was the assistant manager from the exact place I just left. I was flustered and furious and embarrassed. She just looked at me and told me manager is a bitch. So much so she is actually being fired this week, and I will be promoted to her position. What she did was so wrong. If it's okay with you, I would still like to hire you. I think you would be a great eat. We had a brief discussion about the current manager, how the owners would hear about what she had done to me, and if I still wanted the job she would contact me later in the week to arrange a schedule for me. I went in that Saturday, met the owners before a staff meeting, where they introduced the newly promoted manager, explained the previous manager had been let go, and introduced me to the team. I was offered the job, with a slight wage increase. I think minimum wage was around $2.25/hours, and I was given $2.45/hours. I worked there for nearly 10 years. I got my high school diploma, went to college, literally became an adult there, and worked my way up the chain of command. Well, as high as I could, since the manager was so incredible. The turnover rate was crazy low. Literally, my best and worst bosses of all time at that place. Being almost 25 to 30 years ago, obviously no FB, and I haven't kept in touch with much of the crew. But some days I think back on that place. The staff, the customers, the friends, and hope they are all well. Sorry for the long story. Holy chiz, this is amazing. Congrats to you, and I hope you're doing well. I worked with a teacher that sat at his desk the entire year. Kids walked in and out whenever they wanted to. They did practically no work. He told racist jokes and was terrible with the students. One day I was sitting in the teacher workroom and another teacher noticed a phone on the counter. She asked if it was mine. When I said no, we looked at the lock screen to see whose it might be. The picture on the lock screen was of someone's bare tits. A few minutes later the bad coworker walked in and picked it up. Needless to say, he was let go. A guy that was on the keto diet, it's all head of a talk about. He once overheard a conversation I was having with a colleague on a particularly stressful day. He interrupted us to suggest I give up carbs in order to reduce my stress levels. Honestly, reduce carbs would just increase my stress levels. My receptionist is the most useless person I've ever met. Ignores the phones while playing on her own personal device. Takes countless personal calls too. Also does all personal business on their work computer, from shopping to bills. On any given day will constantly find ways to avoid doing work by getting up and shooting the shiz with anyone patient enough to listen. My personal favorite, does not take an ounce of criticism whatsoever. Every question or suggestion is an attack or bullying in their opinion. Person has filed countless sour complaints because other employees have suggested this person focus on their work. Countless meeting and time has been wasted trying to appease this person. Their last day is coming in a few weeks and I'm going to celebrate. From the bottom of my heart and every fiber of being, duck you. I managed a woman who was quite lazy and needed a performance management meeting. She complained to ours that I was aggressive in this meeting. I was asking her to do her job properly. I did the feedback sandwich, starting and finishing by saying positive things, which were quite difficult to think of. I went on maternity and my replacement had to do follow up. The lazy employee also accused her of being aggressive. FML. Ducking Jammy. Her picture belonged next to passive aggressive in the dictionary. She knew how to stay on the good side of the boss, but treated most everyone else like dirt. She would intentionally ignore your attempts to communicate with her regarding important work matters, then turn around and claim you were the one being difficult. Whenever you pointed out one of her mistakes, however small, she would throw a temper tantrum like a little kid. Haven't worked with her for many years now, and I sincerely hope I can eventually forget what she looks like. Not the worst, but the one I remember the best. We shared an office. She would, fairly regularly, open a can of tuna at her desk for lunch and throw the unrinsed can into the trash can at her desk. She also put things like banana peels in her trash can. There was a conference room we could go into for personal phone calls, but instead I got to listen to her talk to doctors about things like her husband's impotence, her frequent yeast infections, and how her toddler got so constipated that they had to manually dig hard poops out of her butt. Fun times. Edit. We shared an 8x8 office. Any strong smell in close quarters is going to become overwhelming. You put your stinky tuna cans or banana peels, or whatever in the, preferably, kitchen/break room trash. Or you at least rinse out the tuna can, or bag the banana peel. Common courtesy, y'all. Geesh. I have a coworker who's very old fashioned, and strongly believes that males and females cannot be friends. Well, it just so happens that my manager and I, a male and a female, happen to get along quite well because of our similar ages and interests. She reported me to the other managers for it and accused me of sleeping with him. People like this drive me nuts. The 1950s can keep them. We don't want them here. I worked at a foreign embassy years ago, and let's just say the work culture/interactions between different tiers of employees was very different from what I was used to. Hands down the worst example of this was the ambassador himself. He would regularly have screaming temper tantrums whenever someone disrespected him or otherwise did something he didn't like. And I mean literal screaming at a volume so it could be heard in the entire 3-story house. He only did this to the employees from his own country, not the native hires, so I didn't get to see it up close, but I heard it plenty of times. Also, we live in one of the most peaceful countries on the planet and have strict gun laws, but because he was a diplomat he could willy-nilly buy himself a gun, which he did, and then he walked around with it in his pocket, from where it randomly dropped out, to be found in odd places around the MA. This impressed the other diplomats so much that they all went out and got guns too. The last sentence is my favorite part. What country was this? I worked in a place similar to YMCA. They hired a tramp/gym coach who was great at those things. But somewhere along the line she also picked up reception shifts. She was also dyslexic. This meant I would get emails I couldn't read with phone messages for obviously wrong names and phone numbers without enough digits, or when I called them turned out to be wrong numbers. The workplace was too scared to move her off reception in case it was discrimination. There was plenty of other work to be done. She didn't need to be fired or anything. So instead of taking a job that wasn't meant to be her job off her, the rest of us had to cop abuse from upset clients because we weren't going to blame her mild disability for us not calling them back. The workplace was too scared to move her off reception in case it was discrimination. So your actual worst coworker was the one in HR/legal who didn't know and couldn't Google the most basic knowledge of the subject. Deleted. Yes. I've been bullied at work too. It's such a crazy thing. Who expects it? But a woman decided she disliked me in my very first week and took every opportunity to inconvenience my work. Success is our best revenge. I walked in on her spitting in my coffee. I worked in a restaurant with a guy who claimed to have PTSD from tripping too hard on LSD. It was a busy place, around 400 to 500 plates a night with only 5 chefs. Every time his station got more than like 10 simultaneous tickets he would run out the back, leaving me and the guy on the other side of him to do his job. Also his PTSD was never medically confirmed and we believed he just made it up. The ones who don't tell you they have too much work. In my culture, people believe you have to be multitasked and bear as much work as possible. However, it's unrealistic. Those who follow are usually unreliable. I had one who were always late to submit his work because he had too much work and took everything as prior task. His being late led to disrupted arrangements. Yes, he is hardworking, but cannot be relied on. I would say the lack of communication is worse than incompetence. I mean, it's necessary for me to know one's difficulties so that I can arrange the work better. Since he was also my friend, I trained him to reject my boss offers whenever he felt pressured. It worked well as he was comfortable to say no. That chiz is so frustrating. I've had a few like that. They're always stressed and overflowing with work, but they act like they're the foundation of the business because they put in so much time. Like, yeah dude, I put in my 8 hours and go home. Because I can prioritize and delegate and finish my chiz instead of half finishing everything and leaving it in a pile on my desk just to make it look like I'm so busy and valuable. And then you have to find diplomatic ways to say yes, you're right, that should have been done last week and could have been done last week. But Ted is a scatterbrained hamster who can't manage his life. I'm not his boss, and he'd rather appear to be so important that he's always swamped instead of the unreliable, lazy, incompetent duckstick he actually is. Like damn, don't make your inability to do your job my ducking problem with your judgment and attitude. Yes, maybe I'm still better, lol. I worked at Starbucks for a year, one of the very worst years of my life, and while I was there had a coworker named Eric. I was at the till the day Eric came in with his resume, and there under his name he had typed architect of imagination. Eric was an aspiring writer, but he had trouble stringing a sentence together. He couldn't be on the machine because he couldn't remember how to use it or how any single drink was made. He couldn't be a support role because he had no way of predicting or understanding what anyone else on the floor needed or even was saying. He couldn't be on register because he couldn't mark a cup, and even our most patient customers would inevitably raise their voices at his incompetence. Reliably, he would genuinely look like he was about to cry. I was so torn between rage and pity. He made a terrible job so much harder, but he was just so breathtakingly, pitifully, shockingly dumb. I have never met anyone like him, before or since. One night I was thinking about something particularly vicious I had said in response to something particularly baffling Eric had done, and found myself wondering about his life outside of our store. Was the world scary and confusing to Eric? Did it seem like life was just happening to him? I imagined him standing in traffic, looking vaguely surprised and confused, forgetting how he had gotten there. I looked him up on Facebook and was pretty disturbed by what I found. Eric didn't look awkward or scared on Facebook. He looked stylish, suave. He had product in his hair. Beautiful women in expensive looking clothes smiled in his photos. Several posted on his wall, expressing what a good time they'd had with him recently, often citing a writing sesh. It felt like I was on a different plane. It felt like I was having a stroke. So then my question became, who is Eric? And who is scamming whom? The popular theory in the store was that Eric was essentially a method actor, doing research for a book or script. I came close to asking him about it a few times, but I was so afraid that I was wrong. I imagined myself over and over asking, are you a method actor, or are you really and truly this stupid? It just wasn't something I could bring myself to risk. I wonder about him all the time, actually, and who he might be terrorizing today. This is wild. I need answers. This dude we all called Pockets had a crew of about 12 journeyman painters who were always on point. Except Pockets. Pockets could be found smoking out in the porta potty. Pockets could be found on the opposite side of the building we were painting. Pockets could also be found on his phone sexting his nastier GF. Pockets would be found walking 2 blocks away from our job site. One time, we didn't see Pockets for damn near an hour. We found Pockets when we took our lunch break. Know where Pockets was? At the exact same Burger King we went to. Pockets had already been there for at least 45 minutes from what the cute counter girl said. Pockets was being paid $2 an hour more than me. Pockets was caught sprinkling meth on a fat bowl by the boss. I got a $2 raise when Pockets was fired. Nobody talks to Pockets. Don't be like Pockets. Do I want to know why his nickname was Pockets? Ooh, how to choose? I think it was the bitch duo, honestly. They were both terrible on their own, but together they became utterly insufferable nunts. Bitch 1 was this super spoiled rich girl. She got a house for agreeing to not marry a woman instead of a man. Clearly not too committed to the woman, so I don't feel too bad that her parents are homophobic. I mean, because clearly she is profiting. She also got a brand new fancy car when she crashed her old one. She made very little money, all from Daddy-O. Anyway, her personality was shallow, insipid, and she made up for lack of depth by being a sarcastic a-hole and stereotypical mean girl. Bitch 1 had connections, so despite actively abandoning an anesthesia patient she was supposed to be monitoring, she still kept her job. Bitch 2 was Bitch 1's friend that she got hired. She was somehow 50 times worse. She was openly rude, aggressive, said it was just because she was blunt. Sneering was her default expression. Bitch 2 had like 10 complaints logged against her within the first 2 months, but they didn't want to fire her because we had a new staff manager person, and she was an absolutely useless cowardly waste of money. Together they basically talked chiz about every other person in the small building, family owned. If you ran afoul of one, the other would magically appear to back her up. They were horrible harpies that deserved to be incinerated and made the work environment utterly toxic. 2 girls quit before I did, one after logging multiple complaints and even calling in for mental health because I can't handle them today. I lined up another job and disappeared, and I don't miss the bitch duo whatsoever. Ah yes, typical. Management, we are going to hire these people because they're qualified when I'm actually just calling in a favor. Later management, we are going to ignore all these complaints. I can't renege on my favor, and also their family, and they deserve more than those other people. Even later management, why are all our educated workers leaving? And wait, why do we have so many bad reviews and complaints filed against us with the state? IDK, what happened? WTF? This girl I work with is overly picky about stuff. Everything has to be her way or no way. She does everything louder to make it seem like she's working, but she's not actually getting anything done. She has been caught stealing from other servers several times, but we have no concrete proof. She accidentally takes people's tips. Stucking hellacious. Had a supervisor that loved to chew her and her. You could make the most minor mistake and she would tell it you, and if you asked to do something or have her show you how to do a task, her excuse was go ask this person, they're better at it, or I'm kinda busy, followed by jumping on her social media. Had a coworker who was hired the exact same day as me and claimed to have been a warehouse manager. He held it over my head occasionally as if he had seniority and more experience. He was also an abusive ex-boyfriend to a friend of mine. He is 25 and was fired last week while I was at home quarantining. At my first ever job, I worked with a middle-aged guy who lived in his car, picked at his face constantly, and would always ask me and the other teenage employees if we needed a ride home from work. He gave off the creepiest vibe and was eventually fired. That was a tweaker. The guy who would work 11 o'clock to 7:30 instead of 9 o'clock to 5:30, claiming cancer remission, making the morning hard for him, but never proving it, no matter how often hours requested something from his doctor, not turn up for work, and not call in, again cancer. Totaled 30 days off sick in 6 months, more than a day a week. Claim had done work, but you'd never see any evidence the week he got a work laptop. Claimed his mother was in hospital, so he'd work from the hospital, but which turned out that he'd decided with his mates to just go to London and have a week-long bender. I was nominally the junior who was still in training at that point. He was the one training me. After the bender, he got fired and boss and I started looking into things. He had done nothing beyond posting cash, not always accurately, to customer accounts. Invoices were wrong. Customers had asked questions which he hadn't answered for weeks, implying that training me was taking too much time, even though he and I were only in the office together for like 4-5 hours a day out of his 7-5 hours. No reconciliations completed. This list just went on. Took my boss and I 6 months to get to a basic this is alright data position, and another 6 to get it running like we wanted it to. Everything else aside, I'm kind of impressed and somewhat jealous he was able to get away with working from 11-7:30. This girl identified herself as a mermaid. Every time I would get mad at her she would call me racist towards mermaids. She was completely serious about this. P.S. I have nothing against aquatic humanoids. This one in particular was a ding dong. More like a dugong finger guns. Bosses who steal your tips and franchisees who don't know what the hell they're doing. For a few summers in high school and college I worked as a groundskeeper at a large hotel complex. As a seasonal employee, I was paired up with the year-round full-time groundskeeper during my shifts, and then he and I would work alternate weekends. He retired suddenly when I was at school, so by the time I returned for the summer they had hired a replacement. Ed was a lateral hire, having previously worked in the hotel's kitchens. He was in his 50s, but based on his maturity and intelligence he wasn't more than a teenager. I heard some rumblings about him being a little off, but didn't pay them much mind, since I knew we'd be spending the whole summer with this guy and didn't want to go into our relationship with any preconceptions about him. The first thing I discovered was that he was dumber than a box of rocks. He used words he didn't know the meaning of, so of course they didn't make sense the way he used them. Whenever the subject of music would come up, he'd never fail to mention that he didn't like that rap crap bullshit. 15 years later, and I can still hear him saying that phrase. He laughed at the dumbest little things. He put an ice cube on my seat in our golf cart, which we used to get around the property, and he'd sit on it, notice it instantly, and stand up and brush the seat off. Wouldn't even get my pants wet. But he'd laugh his ear off, as if it was the prank of the century. Our golf carts had roofs on them. It only takes one time to bang your head on it in order to avoid doing it again. But not for addition. The first time he hit his head was a doozy. He had to stand there crouched over for a few minutes. To regain his composure he whacked it so hard. I felt really bad for him. A few days later he did it again, and I was again concerned. But it became a weekly occurrence. My reactions went from concerned to confused. How does this guy keep doing this? To amused. By the end of the summer I would lose my chiz laughing whenever he hit his head. There was no other way to react than to laugh. If this guy didn't learn the first dozen times he hit his head, then there was no hope for him. One time Ed was helping the boss move an extension ladder. They lifted it up and put it on the roof of a golf cart. The ladder was longer than the cart, so it stuck out both the front and the back sides of the cart. No sooner did he place his end on the roof, he turned away, then turned back, and walked face first into the ladder exactly where he just put it. My boss asked him if he was okay, but then as his mind processed what just happened, he asked Ed how he ran into the ladder he just put there. His immaturity was the next thing I noticed. Sex jokes / comments at a frequency that made me think I was back in middle school. One day we had these iron stakes in the back of the cart. We were driving around, and Ed grabbed one of the stakes and let it drag on the ground, like you would a stick on a fence as you walk by to make noise, making a scraping noise on the asphalt. It was annoying AF. I asked him to stop, so he lifted it up, waited 10 seconds, then started dragging it again. I again asked him to stop, which he did again, and restarted shortly after. That particular day I wasn't in the mood for his bullshit, so I just stopped the cart in the middle of the street, took the key, and walked away. He ran after me and begged me to come back and that he wouldn't do it again. Fortunately he didn't. My coworkers told me stories about how he was on the days I wasn't there. More of the same. Constantly tripping over stuff, falling downstairs, banging his head. They eventually started referring to him as Homer Simpson because he was such a doofus. I could feel myself getting dumber every day I spent with him. His childish antics drove me insane. By the end of the summer I had had enough. I decided to find a new job for the following year because I knew I couldn't spend another summer with him. Last I heard, Ed got injured by getting his arm stuck in the cardboard baler and couldn't work for several months. How he did that I will never know, since you can't turn those things on unless the safety gate is closed, so it's not like it was running when it happened. He ultimately was never medically cleared to return to work, so I don't know what became of him. I was Facebook friends with him when I was in college, but got sick of all the Candy Crush and Farmville invitations from him that I just unfriended him. I have several bad ones, but the one that drives me the most crazy is a lady who creates problems just so she can solve them. She takes a simple job, finds the one tiny issue, blows that up, and freaks everyone out, and then solves it so she can be the hero. Just take the 1 minute to fix the issue in the first place. It would save the literal hours she spends working everyone up so she can be their savior. I worked with this Mexican guy who would constantly sing his Christian rap lyrics at me. He went on to become a tour guide in Germany. Wait, did you say worst or best? I believe he qualifies as worst coworker. The woman who talks a lot. She can give a 10-minute answer to a yes or no question. And that's not an exaggeration. Problem is, she still knows a heck of a lot about the job and uses her excessive words to prove it, so she's the hero of the upper management. He was kinda my boss. He didn't know what he was doing and would leave at 3 PM every day to pick his daughter up from school, and he wouldn't get back to work until about 4:45, then clock out and go home. He also didn't show up till 9 AM every day. So happy I got him fired. OMG Ayumi. This is my boss too, down to the exact times and reasons. A lot of times he doesn't come back, meanwhile he is micromanaging me like a ducker. I can't decide which one to pick. Oddly enough, we all worked in the same quad cube, and their crowning highlight moments both surfaced on the same day, September 11th. One of them spent the whole day stomping around the office bitching about how she had plans to watch the ball game that night, and now her night was ruined because the game was cancelled. And for Christ's sakes, it's not like the planes flew into the stadium, it's just some buildings miles away. The other had some sort of video capture software on his computer and kept replaying the clips of people jumping from the burning buildings, cheering and giggling as if he were watching circus clowns. Dude. Look, there's another one. Whoa, he bounced off the side. Man. That had to hurt. Hey, watch this. Then he'd roll the video backwards and forwards, making a slide whistle noise as the people repeatedly went back and forth. Jesus Christ. Many years ago, when I was young, working in a kitchen, I worked for a few months with a guy who was a complete nutcase. He was mid-late 30s, super smart and educated in a self-taught way, but he was one of those guys who would get angry at the slightest bit of stress. The sort who never gets aggressive towards people but towards objects, punching walls, slamming pans on the counter, that kind of thing. He was only 5'5"-ish, 152 centimeters, but worked out and was buff as hell. He had a ton of jobs before our place and apparently never stayed at one place for more than a few months. In retrospect, I figure he probably had a lot of unmet potential and was very frustrated. Anyway, working with him was pretty intimidating, particularly as I was young at the time. Thinking back, I don't think he was trying to be intimidating. He was just so angry that's how he was. He really didn't give a chiz about customers' food, and there's one incident that really stands out. We were pretty busy, and he was putting a pizza in a box for takeout when he slips, and the whole thing falls cheese down on the floor. The filthy floor with crap all over it. "It's no my fault. It's not my fault," he muttered to himself as he slides a board under it and flips it into a box. It looked like cheese, so he wiped some of the crap off, threw in some herbs, and sent it out. It was palatable, I suppose, but pretty gross. One of those little things that keeps me up at night is that I never stepped in and got it remade. I guess I was probably a little afraid of him. Anyway, maybe I just work with a lot of great people, but he was the worst. I had this monster store manager, Masses. She was horrible. It was all about money and everything she could sneak out for free. She made people cry every day. I hope she is suffering during this lockdown, just because she is forced to stay home with her family, who she actively hated. Masses is the devil. I worked there during the last recession, when I was out of work. It was so horrible I refused to step foot in there anymore. They treat their people like crap. It's funny, but I don't have a single worst person as much as a worst archetype. At every single job I've had, there has been a middle-aged woman who's been there a ridiculously long time and complains about literally everything. Just belly aches non-stop. Every new thing is an unnecessary imposition. Every day is a titanic struggle. She moans. She pouts. She grumbles under her breath. She's not nearly as good at her job as she should be after having done it for 25 years. She shares inappropriately detailed information about her personal life, whether that means who she's dating, her health problems, or her out-of-control teenaged or adult kids. It's always at least one of those though. She usually also openly defies the bosses, but nobody will really do anything about her because she's been there longer than any of the management and somehow they're all kind of scared of her. Makes no sense. But there's been one at every job, no matter what kind of job. I've worked a lot of different jobs since college in a lot of different fields. Every office, every warehouse, every coffee shop, and call center has this person. No exceptions. I've come to the conclusion that this kind of person is inevitable and somehow integral to every workplace in some way that I can't grasp. In the same way that mosquitoes are important to an ecosystem in ways you wouldn't understand unless they went extinct. And you wish fervently that they would go extinct when you're covered in itching welts after an otherwise lovely evening at the park. Just like you wish fervently that goddamn Linda in accounting would just shut up and go work somewhere else if she hates it here so much. But there's an ecological niche that has to be filled. So even if she did put her money where her whinnier mouth is and leave, a new Linda would ascend. Whoever was the second most tenured and jaded would take on the mantle and invite all the new hires out for lunch on their first day to tell them how it really is around here. It's just the way of things. Not for me to know why, but there has to be one. At this point, I think if I ever got a job and didn't encounter this person, I'd spend weeks with an uncertain sense of dread about something I couldn't articulate, because a workplace where nobody stirs up drama like it's their job would feel wrong. I worked with someone in retail. He was my boss, and not a particularly bad guy, but he was a control freak who had to interject his opinion during every conversation anyone was having with a customer. This also went as far as him being in the middle of helping someone himself, stopping helping that customer, to lean over to my till, to help me with my transaction, even though there was no indication I needed help, and had worked there for over 5 years. This help would be in the form of him telling me what button to hit next on the till, to telling a customer they were wrong to have any given opinion on a topic, to telling customers that their choice of entertainment they were purchasing wasn't what they were after, even if they specifically came into the store for that specific item. He was also lousy as duck. Not a bad guy, but holy hell do I not miss working with him. The boss who used to grab my A. She knew I was married and not interested, but kept doing it. I finally went 2 hours, but it was a small company and they were close friends. My workload then grew, and she got more aggressive. She told me that no one would believe man was the victim, and everything I looked into said I didn't have a lot of hope. I ended up quitting the job and not finding anything new for 6 months. It was expensive. I told my parents that I got fired because that was strangely less humiliating than admitting I was a victim. That's super ducked up, and I'm so sorry that happened to you. I hope you're doing better now. I used to work for a 20-person company, and they hired a guy to manage our department of 4. One weekend, he was sick and shoved a tissue up his nose and left it there to hang out of his nose hole. He then went into a client meeting with the tissue still up there. 2 weeks in, we had some wine on a Friday afternoon in the office. A coworker asked him why he had put ice cubes in his, and he said casually that he had put Tito's in it. All in all, I believe he only worked at the company for 3 months, but in that time he was just a garbage human and impossible to work with. After he was fired, he stole his work laptop and eventually snuck it back into the office after he found out charges were being pressed. What artitus? One guy who swore that the company was conspiring against men since they continuously hire people and the last batch of new employees were women. Literally would wait till all women leave the room to say that the company is plotting against us men. I would just tell him to STHU since it was workplace appropriate, but he was serious as all hell. Dude, I had a coworker who was convinced of this too. He would tell anyone who would listen. When he didn't get a promotion, he told everyone it was because of what was between his legs, and then when we found out that the person who got it was a man, he said it was because he was young and easy for them to manipulate. And it was at a fitness complex, so I'm not sure what needs to be manipulated. Maybe like the racquetball court schedule? My current supervisor and head supervisor. We work in the MRDD field. I got a call one Tuesday morning and my boss was slurring her words and telling me to bring her hangover food. I show up about 20 minutes before my scheduled shift, and when I walked in she could not stand up straight and all you could smell was alcohol. Our head supervisor leaves, and she fully confesses that she was absolutely trashed, and that she had been drinking from 9 PM Monday night to Tuesday at 12 PM with our head supervisor on the clock. She then proceeded to sleep and leave me to care for 4 individuals for 8 hours while she was still on the clock. That following Friday, I show up to work again, and she got on my face and again it smelled like a bar. She told me that if I told anyone I would lose my job and licenses. That weekend she tried to force me to work a 3P to 4A shift because someone had a fever and couldn't come in. When I told her I was not required to cover anything outside of my shift without prior consent, she screamed again in my face and told me to just leave. I called my head supervisor and I haven't heard anything still. 2 weeks later I ended up breaking my foot on my weekend off, and I called her from the hospital Sunday afternoon telling her I have to have the next 48 hours off to somewhat start the healing process, and she refused that and put me on light duty. I show up Monday afternoon, 26 hours after I got the proper medical care for my foot, and said something about my foot hurting, and she told me, well, a chunky girl of your size can't carry your own weight. I'm not small, but I'm happy where I am, and my weight has nothing to do with the fact that I had broken a bone less than 48 hours ago, and only 24 hours with medical care. And she then proceeded to leave me alone with a seizure patient who put herself on the floor, and I had to pick her up. She came back in around 930p to put them into bed, and she was drinking again. My current supervisor and head supervisor, any thoughts about making that former? Worked with a guy who was really good at the job, but everyone complained about him, and I could not figure out why, until I changed shifts and was around him more often. Anytime an attractive woman walked within eyesight, he'd stop and say something along the lines of, "Man, look at the tits on her," or, "I'd duck the chiz out of her, wouldn't you?" Usually at full volume too. Just awful to be around. I'm sympathetic to bipolar people, but it was very difficult coming from a boss. As I've heard it said and totally agree, your mental health isn't your fault, but it is your responsibility. Some chick named Millie. Apparently this mother of 3 didn't know how to cut bread safely. She cut the baguette while it was still in her hand. We worked in a kitchen and she was standing in front of a cutting board. Surprise, she sliced her hand. I took her upstairs to the office with the first aid kit. I turn around and she is spreading open her wound trying to make it worse. I yelled at her. She quit soon after. I hope I made her feel dumb. I always just feel bad for people when they cut themselves. Trying to duck with it after the fact is just stupid though. Head to the back, get some air, clean it and stop the bleeding, then have someone stitch you up and evaluate if you can go back. I used to work at this sports bar that served house brisket sandwiches, smoked and sliced in-house. Apparently a year or so before I had started there, some dumb bitch in town on a working holiday had decided she wanted to slice every last bit of the brisket, even though the guard didn't reach properly. So she used her bare palm on a goddamn rotary slicer. That was her last day, I think. Don't mind me, just wanna make sure there are no stories about me. We have this Italian woman at my work whose regular speaking voice is so loud you can hear her across the building. When she's talking to someone beside her, she isn't shareable as far as being penalized for anything is concerned, and so barely does any actual work. At one point years ago she decided to try driving a forklift and drove it through a bathroom wall that was luckily empty. I think she almost got a slap on the wrist for that one. A manager once had the balls to aim her to training a new worker. She treated him so badly that by the end of his second day he cut 2 of the tires on her car as he walked off the job. Surprisingly, she did actually get temporarily suspended after that incident, and we have to have a few team meetings about bullying in the workplace. Those of us that have been here longer know that if we want a process changed or have any ideas not to tell management because they don't care, we tell her instead and get her to tell management, and that change will be implemented before she finishes pitching it to them. Oh my, you watched until the end? That's fucking awesome, dude. Thanks for watching.